The Galactic Council space station buzzed with its usual activity until the massive doors opened with a soft hiss. Everything changed in that moment. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Footsteps slowed to a halt. Even the constant hum of alien machinery seemed to quiet down as the Velnari delegation entered the main corridor. They moved like water-given form, their 8-foot bodies flowing rather than walking. Their scales caught the station's artificial light and threw it back in, waves of silver and blue that shifted with each graceful movement. To Ambassador Hyojin, watching from the human observation deck 3 levels up, they looked like living art. Beautiful, elegant, and completely mesmerizing. But she was apparently the only one who thought so. Within seconds, the corridor below emptied as if someone had pulled a fire alarm. The rock-like granite people, who usually moved slowly and deliberately, suddenly found the energy to shuffle away at impressive speed. The floating mist beings simply vanished into the ventilation systems. Even the proud warrior clans of Draxon, who never backed down from anything, quietly slipped into side passages. "There they go again," whispered Kim-Ho, the junior human diplomat standing beside her. He adjusted his glasses nervously as he watched the exodus below. "You know, I heard that last week. Ambassador Thex from the Trading Guild actually fainted when one of them looked directly at him." Hyojin shook her head in amazement. "But look at them, Kim-Ho, really look, they're incredible." Down below, the lead Velnari, who Hyojin had learned was called Silvera, glided toward the council chambers. Her forearms moved in perfect coordination, creating subtle gestures that seemed to carry meaning. Her elongated head turned slightly, and for just a moment, those large, luminous eyes looked up toward the human section. Hyojin felt her breath catch. There was something ancient and wise in that gaze, but also something deeply sad. "I don't get it," Hyojin continued, more to herself than to Kim-Ho. "Everyone acts like they're monsters, but I've been watching them for months now. They never raise their voices. They never make threatening gestures. When they speak in the council meetings, their voices are softer than whispers. They're more polite than half the diplomats here." Kim-Ho shifted uncomfortably. "Well, you have to admit they do look like, predators. Those teeth, those claws, the way they move. My grandmother always said that millions of years of evolution taught us to recognize danger, and every instinct we have screams run when we see them." "But that's exactly my point," Hyojin said, leaning forward against the railing. "Our instincts aren't always right. Remember when humans first met the flower people? Everyone thought they were just pretty plants until we realized they were actually incredibly intelligent beings. We almost missed out on one of our best friendships because of assumptions." The Velnari delegation had reached the council chamber doors now. As they approached, 2 guards from different species actually stepped backward, their hands moving unconsciously toward their weapons. The Velnari didn't react to this at all. They simply waited patiently until the doors opened, then flowed inside with that same liquid grace. "I wonder what they think about all this," Hyojin mused. "Imagine being them. You show up to every meeting, you follow every protocol, you try to be part of the galactic community, and everyone runs away from you before you even speak. How lonely must that be?" Kim-Ho looked at her with concern. "Hyojin, you're not thinking of actually approaching them, are you? The ambassador would have your head. The safety protocols clearly state that all contact with unknown, potentially dangerous species should go through proper channels and multiple approval processes." Hyojin smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was the kind of smile that had gotten her into trouble many times before, the same smile she'd worn when she decided to learn the clicking language of the Insect Federation or when she volunteered for the first human mission to the underwater cities. "Sometimes, Kim-Ho," she said quietly, "the most dangerous thing you can do is play it safe." The council session had been another disaster. Ambassador Hyojin watched from the human section as the Altarian representative literally climbed over his desk to get away when Silvera had simply raised one of her 4 hands to ask a question. The poor alien had knocked over his water container and scattered his notes everywhere in his desperate escape. Even the session moderator, a usually calm and collected being from the neutral zone, had quickly declared an early recess when the Velnari delegation stood up to leave. Now the great hall was nearly empty. Most diplomats had fled to their quarters, or the safety of their species sections. Only a few maintenance workers remained, quietly cleaning up the chaos left behind. Kim Ho tugged at Hyejin's sleeve. "Come on, let's go," he whispered urgently. "The debriefing starts in 20 minutes, and you know how the ambassador gets when we're late." But Hyejin wasn't moving. Her eyes were fixed on the lone figure still sitting in the Velnari section. Silvira remained in her designated area, her elegant form coiled gracefully around the specially designed seating. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, just staring straight ahead with those large, luminous eyes. There was something about her posture that struck Hyejin as incredibly lonely. "You go ahead," Hyejin said, already walking toward the steps that led down to the main floor. "Tell them I'll be there in a few minutes." "Hyejin, no?" Kim Ho's voice cracked with panic. "You can't just walk up to her. What if she's dangerous? What if there's some kind of protocol we don't know about? What if—" But Hyejin was already halfway down the stairs, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She'd been thinking about this moment for weeks, planning what she might say, how she might approach. All those plans seemed silly now as she walked across the empty floor of the council chamber. Her footsteps echoed in the vast space, and she saw Silvera's head turn slightly at the sound. Those incredible eyes focused on her, and Hyejin felt a little shiver run down her spine. Not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of that gaze. It was like being looked at by someone who could see right through you. Hyejin stopped about 6 feet away, close enough to talk comfortably, but far enough to show respect for personal space. She took a deep breath and did something that no other species had done in months of council sessions. She smiled and said, "Hello." The simple word seemed to hang in the air between them. Silvera's serpentine form went completely still, and for a moment, Hyejin wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe there was some cultural taboo she didn't know about. Maybe direct greetings were considered rude or threatening. Then Silvera's head tilted slightly, a gesture that somehow seemed very human despite her alien features. When she spoke, her voice was like music, soft and melodic with an accent that made each word sound like it was being carefully chosen. "You are not afraid," she said, and it wasn't really a question. It was more like she was stating something that surprised her. Hyejin felt her nervousness start to fade, replaced by genuine curiosity. "Should I be?" "All the others are." Silvera's forearms moved in a graceful gesture that might have been the equivalent of a shrug. "They see us and think only of teeth and claws and ancient hunts. They see predators where we have become something else entirely." "What do you see when you look at me?" Hyejin asked, genuinely curious. Silvera was quiet for a long moment, those luminous eyes studying Hyejin's face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "I see someone who asks questions instead of running away, someone who approaches the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. It has been a very long time since anyone has looked at us with curiosity." And then something amazing happened. The patterns on Silvera's scales began to shift and brighten, creating waves of soft light that pulsed gently across her elegant form. It was like watching the aurora borealis dance across her skin. Hyejin realized she was seeing a Velnari smile, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever witnessed. "I'm Hyejin," she said, extending her hand in the universal human gesture of greeting. Silvera looked at the outstretched hand for a moment, then carefully extended one of her own forearms. Her skin was warm and surprisingly soft, with just the slightest texture from her scales. "I am Silvera," she replied, and those bioluminescent patterns brightened just a little more. "And you, Hyejin of the humans, have just done something that no one else in this galaxy has dared to do in many, many months." "What's that?" "You have treated us like people instead of monsters." 3 days later, Hyejin found herself in a place she never thought she'd be, sitting across from Silvera in one of the station's quiet observation lounges, sharing what could only be described as tea. Well, it wasn't exactly tea. The Velnari drink was a warm, golden liquid that tasted like honey mixed with starlight, if starlight had a flavor. Silvera had prepared it herself, using a small, elegant device that seemed to grow the beverage rather than brew it. "Your people seem to enjoy rituals around warm drinks," Silvera observed. her bioluminescent patterns pulsing gently as she spoke. "We noticed this in your cultural files. Coffee, tea, hot chocolate, always gathering around warmth and sharing stories." Hyejin smiled, wrapping her hands around the delicate cup. "It's one of our favorite ways to get to know someone. There's something about sitting together with a warm drink that makes conversation easier." She paused, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind for days. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You may ask anything," Silvera replied, though her elegant head tilted slightly in what Hyejin was learning was a sign of curiosity. "Why do you keep coming to the council sessions? I mean, it must be awful watching everyone run away from you every single time. Why put yourself through that?" Silvera was quiet for a long moment, her forearms moving in slow, thoughtful gestures. When she finally spoke, her musical voice carried a weight of sadness that made Hyejin's heart ache. "Because we remember what we used to be," she said softly, "and we know what everyone sees when they look at us." She set down her cup and moved to the large viewing window that showed the stars beyond the station. Her 8-foot form seemed to flow like liquid mercury as she positioned herself to look out into space. "Millions of years ago, my ancestors were the ultimate hunters on our world. We had claws that could tear through metal, teeth that could crush bone, speed that made us impossible to escape from. We were designed by evolution to be perfect killers." Her scales shifted to deeper, darker colors as she spoke. "Every other species on our planet either served as our prey or stayed far away from us." Hyejin joined her at the window, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to show she was listening. "What changed?" "We became intelligent," Silvera replied, "but not just intelligent in the way that lets you build tools or solve problems. We developed something your scientists call empathy, but for us it became something much stronger. We began to feel the pain of every creature we hurt, the fear of every being we frightened. It became physically painful for us to cause suffering." She turned to look at Hyejin, and those luminous eyes seemed to glow with intensity. "Imagine being born with the body of a perfect predator, but the soul of someone who cannot bear to see others in pain. Imagine having claws that could tear apart steel, but feeling sick every time you accidentally scratch something. That is what we became." "So you stopped hunting?" Hyejin asked. "We stopped everything that caused fear or pain. We rebuilt our entire civilization around gentleness and beauty. We created art instead of weapons, music instead of battle cries, poetry instead of war chants. We learned to grow our food from plants, to heal instead of harm, to create rather than destroy." Silvera's patterns brightened slightly. "We thought we had overcome our past, but others still see the predator." "Yes." The word came out like a sigh. "No matter how gentle we become, no matter how beautiful our cities or peaceful our ways, every species looks at us and sees only death. They see our claws and imagine being torn apart. They see our teeth and think of being devoured. They see our size and speed and remember ancestral fears buried deep in their genetic memory." Hyejin felt a flash of anger at the unfairness of it all. "But that's not who you are anymore." "No, but it is who we appear to be, and appearances, we have learned, matter more than reality in this galaxy." Silvera moved back to her seat, her movements graceful but somehow tired. "We come to the council sessions because we hope that someday someone will look past the surface. Someone will be curious enough to ask questions instead of running away. Like humans did." For the first time since they'd started talking, Silvera's phytoluminescent patterns brightened into what Hyejin now recognized as joy. "Like you did, Hyejin. You looked at us and saw mystery instead of menace. You saw beauty instead of beast. Do you know how rare that is?" Hyejin thought about all the species she'd seen flee from the Velnari, all the fear and prejudice she'd witnessed. The galaxy is missing out on something incredible, isn't it? "We like to think so," Silvera replied, with what might have been humor. "We have sciences that could revolutionize medicine, arts that could inspire for generations, philosophies that took us millennia to develop. But none of that matters if no one will stay in the same room long enough to listen." Hyejin looked at her new friend and felt something shift inside her understanding of the universe. Here was an entire species, advanced and gentle and wise, being judged purely on their appearance. It was prejudice on a galactic scale, and it was completely, utterly wrong. "Well," she said, raising her cup in a toast, "they're idiots for missing out, but their loss is humanity's gain." Silvera's patterns blazed with warmth as she raised her own cup to meet it. Dr. Min-Su gripped the armrests of his shuttle seat as they broke through the atmosphere of Silthis, the Velnari homeworld. He'd agreed to join Hyejin's diplomatic mission mostly because his xenobiology research needed funding, and a successful first contact would guarantee grants for years. What he hadn't expected was to feel this nervous about meeting an entire planet of beings that made his survival instincts scream warnings. "Relax, Min-Su," Hyejin said from the seat beside him, though she was pressing her face against the viewport, like an excited child. "Look at that." Min-Su forced himself to look out the window and immediately forgot his nervousness. The landscape below didn't look like any planet he'd ever studied. Instead of the rigid geometric cities most species built, the Velnari settlements flowed across the terrain like living rivers. Buildings curved and twisted in organic shapes that seemed to grow from the ground itself, their surfaces shifting between colors as they caught the light from Silthis's twin suns. "It's like someone took a painting and made it three-dimensional," whispered Ginny, the cultural specialist on their team. She was frantically taking notes and pictures. "I've never seen architecture that moves like that." Their shuttle pilot, a nervous human named Tae Woo, cleared his throat. Folks, we're getting landing instructions now, and they're beautiful. The control tower is singing to us." Indeed, instead of the usual mechanical beeping and static-filled voices, their communication system was filled with melodic tones that somehow conveyed exactly where they needed to go. Min-Su found himself humming along without realizing it. The landing pad was a work of art itself, with patterns that seemed to shift and dance beneath their shuttle's landing gear. As they disembarked, Min-Su saw their welcoming committee and felt his breath catch. Silvera was there, of course, but she was accompanied by a dozen other Velnari, and together they were absolutely stunning. Their scales caught the sunlight and threw it back in waves of color that made the air itself seem to shimmer. "Welcome to Silthis," Silvera said, her voice carrying easily across the landing area. "We are honored to receive the first official human delegation to our world." As they were guided through the city, Min-Su kept stopping to stare. The buildings weren't just beautiful, they were alive. Walls that shifted color with the temperature, doorways that opened like flowers, windows that cleared or clouded depending on the light. Plants and technology grew together so seamlessly that it was impossible to tell where nature ended and engineering began. "How do you build like this?" he asked their guide, a younger Velnari named Kethara, whose scales were predominantly silver with streaks of deep blue. "We do not build," Kethara replied with amusement. "We grow, we convince. We ask the materials to become what we need, and they choose to cooperate." She touched a wall and it rippled under her palm like water. "Your species uses force to shape your environment. We use partnership." They were taken to what Silvera called a harmony center, a vast space where hundreds of Velnari were engaged in activities that Min-Su couldn't quite categorize. Some were creating sculptures that seemed to move and breathe. Others were producing music by touching crystalline formations that responded with complex melodies. Still others sat in circles, apparently doing nothing but somehow generating patterns of light that danced in the air above them. "This is what we do," Silvera explained, as they watched a group of Velnari convince metal to flow into impossible shapes without any heat or tools. "We create. We explore the boundaries between thought and reality, between individual and collective experience. We have had 10,000 years to perfect the arts of peace." Janae was scribbling notes so fast her hand was cramping. "This is incredible. You've built an entire civilization around creation instead of destruction, cooperation instead of competition. The philosophical implications alone could revolutionize how we think about society." But Min-Su noticed something else. Despite all the beauty, despite the obvious advancement of their culture, there was something sad in the way the Velnari moved, a kind of careful restraint, as if they were constantly holding themselves back. "Silvera," he said quietly, "can I ask you something that might be personal?" "Of course." You're all so graceful, so controlled, but sometimes I catch glimpses of something else, something more primal. Do you ever miss it? The way you used to be?" The question seemed to ripple through the nearby Velnari like a stone thrown into still water. Silvera's patterns dimmed slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of millennia. "Every day," she admitted. "Do you know what it is like to be born with the instincts of a hunter, but the heart of a healer? To have reflexes that could kill in an instant, but to feel physical pain when you accidentally step on a flower. We dream sometimes of the simplicity our ancestors knew, the clarity of purpose, the freedom from constant self-control." She gestured to the harmony center around them. "All of this beauty, all of this peace, it requires us to fight our nature every moment of every day. We are predators pretending to be philosophers, killers who have chosen to become gardeners of beauty, and the galaxy looks at us and sees only the predator we were, never the artists we chose to become." Minsu felt something shift in his understanding. "That's why everyone fears you. Not because of what you might do, but because of what you're capable of doing." "Yes, they sense the violence we carry within us, even though we have spent 10,000 years learning to transform it into something else. They cannot see past our potential for destruction to witness our commitment to creation." Hyejin stepped forward, her eyes bright with emotion. "But we can see it. Humans can see what you've become, not just what you were." Silvera's bioluminescent patterns blazed with hope and gratitude. "And that, dear friends, is why we believe this partnership between our peoples could change everything." 6 months after the first human delegation returned from Silthis, Dr. Jinwoo found himself doing something that would have been impossible just a year ago. Working side by side with a Velnari scientist in a joint research laboratory that existed in both human and Velnari space simultaneously. The lab itself was a marvel of combined engineering, with sections that could shift between human-friendly environments and the flowing organic spaces the Velnari preferred. "Jinwoo, look at this," called his research partner, Velnari scientist Thylara, her forearms dancing over a bioscanner that seemed to grow from the lab table itself. "The protein is responding to our combined approach in ways neither of our species predicted." Jinwoo hurried over, his tablet displaying readings that made his heart race with excitement. They'd been working on a treatment for vegan fever, a disease that had been killing thousands across the galaxy for decades. Human medical technology could identify the problem, but couldn't solve it. Velnari bioengineering could manipulate living systems, but couldn't target the specific issue. Together, though, they were creating something revolutionary. "The nanobots are actually learning from your bioguides," Jinwoo said in amazement. "Watching microscopic human technology adapt and evolve under the influence of Velnari organic programming. They're not just following instructions anymore, they're thinking. And your quantum processors are giving our living systems a precision we never dreamed possible," Thylara replied, her scales shimmering with excitement. "Jinwoo, I think we've just created the first truly intelligent medicine. Their breakthrough was just one of many, happening across a dozen joint facilities. Captain So Young was leading exploration missions with Velnari navigators who could sense spatial anomalies that human instruments missed entirely. Engineer Dongmin was working with Velnari architects to design ships that could repair themselves during flight. Dr. Haiwan had partnered with Velnari psychologists to develop new treatments for trauma that worked on any species. The results were extraordinary. The intelligent medicine Jinwoo and Thylara created saved over 50,000 lives in its first month of distribution. So Young's mixed crew discovered 3 new star systems that opened up trade routes worth billions. Dongmin's self-healing ships reduced space travel accidents by 90%, but success came with a price. "Ambassador, we need to talk," said Kim Ho, bursting into Hyejin's office with a stack of diplomatic messages that seemed to grow thicker every day. "The complaints are getting worse. The Altarian Trade Federation is threatening to cut off all commerce with human colonies. The Draxan warrior clans are calling our alliance a betrayal of natural order. Even the peaceful flower people are asking if we've lost our minds." Hyejin looked up from her own pile of increasingly hostile communications. "What are they saying?" "Exactly. They're calling us predator lovers and death dealers, Kim Ho said, his voice tight with frustration. Ambassador Kekstar from the Silicon Collective gave a speech yesterday claiming that humans are dangerously naive, and that we're going to get everyone killed by trusting the Velnari. That's ridiculous, Hyejin said, but she couldn't hide her concern. The Velnari have been nothing but helpful. Their technology is saving lives every day. I know that and you know that. But try explaining it to species who run away every time they see a Velnari. Kim Ho sat down heavily. There's something else. The Neutral Trade Zone is considering a vote to ban all Velnari technology from their markets. They're saying it's tainted by predator influence and could be dangerous. Hyejin felt a flash of anger. Dangerous? Jin Woo's team just cured a disease that's been killing people for decades. So Young's exploration missions are opening up new worlds for colonization. How is any of that dangerous? Because it's successful, came a new voice from the doorway. Dr. Min-Soo entered, looking tired but determined. I've been analyzing the political responses, and it's not really about the Velnari being dangerous. It's about us being successful. With them. What do you mean? Min-Soo activated his holographic display, showing graphs and charts that painted a clear picture. Look at this. Every major breakthrough we've made with Velnari partnership has put human colonies ahead of other species in some way. We're discovering new resources, developing better technology, saving more lives. Other species aren't just afraid of the Velnari, they're jealous of what we're accomplishing together. So they're trying to sabotage us, Hyejin said, understanding. Dawning? Exactly. If they can convince the galaxy that our partnership is dangerous, they can force us to stop working together. Then they don't have to compete with our combined advantages. Min-Soo's expression was grim. The problem is their fear of the Velnari makes their arguments sound reasonable. How can humans trust predators? What if the Velnari are manipulating them? What if this partnership leads to violence? Kim Ho groaned. And every success we have just makes them more convinced that something sinister is going on. To them, the idea that the Velnari are genuinely helpful is less believable than the idea that it's all some elaborate trap. Hyejin stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the space station where she could see human and Velnari technicians working together to repair a damaged transport ship. Their cooperation was so natural now, so easy, that it was hard to remember how revolutionary it had seemed just months ago. You know what the really frustrating part is, she said quietly. We're proving that cooperation works better than fear. We're showing the entire galaxy that amazing things happen when you look past prejudice and work together. And instead of celebrating that, they want to tear it down because it makes them uncomfortable. So what do we do? Kim Ho asked. Hyejin turned back to her colleagues, and they saw the same determined expression that had led her to approach Silvera in the first place. We keep proving them wrong, she said firmly. Every day, with every success, with every life we save and every discovery we make, eventually, even the most stubborn species will have to admit that partnership is stronger than prejudice. The owl. Alarm started screaming at 0347 station time, jerking Dr. Subin awake in her quarters, aboard Research Station Harmony. She'd been dreaming about the protein synthesis experiment she was running with her Velnari partner, Kethmore, when the harsh sound cut through her sleep like a knife. All personnel to emergency stations, came the announcement over the comm system. We have 3 unidentified ships approaching at high speed. This is not a drill. Subin threw on her clothes and rushed toward the command center, her heart pounding. Harmony Station was supposed to be in safe space, far from any conflict zones. It was a joint human-Velnari research facility, one of the first of its kind, floating peacefully in neutral territory, where both species could work together without interference. The corridors were filled with running figures, humans and Velnari moving together toward their emergency positions. Subin noticed that none of the humans were panicking, despite the obvious danger. Working alongside the Velnari for months had taught them that their alien partners remained calm under pressure, and that calmness was contagious. She reached the command center just as Captain Jamin was receiving the first communication from the approaching ships. "Attention Research Station Harmony," came a harsh electronic voice over the speakers. "You are harboring dangerous predator species in violation of galactic safety protocols. Surrender the Velnari immediately, or we will take them by force. Subin." Felt her blood run cold. These weren't random pirates. They were some kind of anti-Velnari extremist group. "This is Captain Jamin of Research Station Harmony," the captain replied, his voice steady. "We are a peaceful research facility operating under full galactic authorization. You have no authority here." "We have the authority of species survival," the voice shot back. "You humans have been contaminated by predator influence. We're here to cleanse this sector." Through the viewport, Subin could see the 3 ships approaching. They were heavily armed vessels, much larger than anything the research station could handle. Harmony's defenses were designed to handle accidents and emergencies, not military attacks. "Jamin," said a melodic voice from behind them. Silvera had entered the command center, moving with her usual flowing grace. But something was different about her. The gentle bioluminescent patterns that usually danced across her scales were dimmer, more focused. "How long until they reach us?" 12 minutes at their current speed, Jamin replied. "I've sent out a distress call, but the nearest patrol ship is at least an hour away." Silvera nodded, and Subin noticed that her usually soft movements had become more precise, more controlled. "Then we will handle this ourselves." "Silvera." "No," Subin said quickly. "There are 3 of them, and they're armed for war. This isn't like our research problems. You can't solve this with gentle persuasion." For the first time since Subin had known her, Silvera smiled in a way that wasn't entirely gentle. "Dear Subin, you have seen us at our most civilized. But civilization is a choice we make every day, not a weakness we suffer from." Before anyone could respond, Silvera was moving toward the station's small launch bay. Her 8-foot form flowed through the corridors faster than Subin had ever seen her move, and several other Velnari joined her, including Kethmore, who gave Subin a reassuring look as he passed. "What are they doing?" Jamin demanded. But Subin was already following, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. She reached the launch bay just as Silvera was climbing into one of the station's maintenance pods, a small, lightly armed vessel designed for external repairs. 2 other Velnari took similar pods, their movements now carrying a deadly precision that made Subin's ancient human instincts whisper warnings. "Silvera, wait!" Subin called out through the comm system. "Those ships will destroy you." "No," Silvera replied, and her voice carried a confidence that was both reassuring and terrifying. "They will not." The 3 maintenance pods launched into space, tiny specks against the darkness compared to the massive warships bearing down on them. Subin watched from the observation deck as what should have been a hopeless battle began. But it wasn't a battle. It was a dance. The Velnari pods moved like nothing Subin had ever seen, flowing between laser blasts with impossible grace, striking with surgical precision at exactly the right points on the enemy ships. Silvera's pod seemed to anticipate every move the pirates made, sliding past their weapons fire as if she could see the future. Within minutes, the first pirate ship was drifting helplessly, its engines disabled, but its crew unharmed. The second ship tried to ram Silvera's pod, only to find itself spinning out of control as she somehow redirected its momentum against itself. The third ship actually tried to retreat, but Kethmore's pod was already there, waiting as if he'd known exactly where they would try to run. "How are they doing this?" whispered Jamin, staring at the display in amazement. Subin understood, finally seeing the truth that the galaxy had missed. "They're not just intelligent predators," she said softly. "They're perfect predators who chose to become something else, but the predator is still there, sleeping under all that gentleness." On screen, Silvera's pod was gently nudging the disabled pirate ships into a holding pattern, herding them like a shepherd with sheep. The entire engagement had lasted less than 10 minutes, and not a single pirate had been killed. When Silvera returned to the station, she moved with her usual flowing grace, the deadly precision already fading back into gentle elegance. But Subin noticed that every human who saw her now looked at her with a new kind of respect, not fear but awe. "You could have destroyed them completely," Subin said when Silvera entered the command center. "Yes," Silvera replied simply. "But we choose not to." That choice made every day in every situation is what makes us who we are now instead of who we were. The message was clear to everyone watching, and Subin knew it would spread across the galaxy within hours. The Velnari weren't gentle because they were weak. They were gentle because they were strong enough to choose gentleness. The holographic display in Jamin's office flickered with dozens of news feeds from across the galaxy, and every single one made his stomach twist with frustration. The headlines scrolled past in a parade of fear and misinformation that seemed to get worse every hour. Human colonies compromised by predator influence. Experts warn. Velnari manipulation techniques threaten galactic peace, trade alliance calls for immediate sanctions on dangerous human-predator partnership. This is insane, Jamin muttered, switching to another feed that showed Ambassador Dalrex, a tall, crystal-skinned being from the Silicon Collective, addressing a packed auditorium of representatives from 40 different species. "My fellow beings," Dalrex was saying, his voice resonating through the translation systems with practiced authority, "we cannot stand by while one species endangers us all through their naive trust in natural-born killers. The humans have been deceived, possibly even mentally influenced by these Velnari predators." The audience murmured agreement, and Jamin could see species he'd worked with for years nodding along with Dalrex's words. These were diplomats and traders he'd shared meals with, beings he'd considered friends, and now they were treating humans like they were infected with some kind of disease. "Look at the evidence," Dalrex continued, bringing up holographic displays of the recent pirate incident at Research Station Harmony. 3 military vessels, disabled in minutes by creatures, using civilian maintenance pods. Does this look like the work of peaceful philosophers, or does it look like apex predators revealing their true nature? The crowd erupted in worried chatter. On screen, the footage of Silvera's impossible maneuvering looked terrifying when presented without context. The fluid grace that had amazed Zubin became something sinister when viewed through the lens of fear. Jamin's communication console chimed with an incoming message from Young Su, who was working the diplomatic channels from his position at the human embassy. "Jamin, it's getting worse." Young Su's worried face appeared on the screen. "The Altarian Trade Federation just voted to ban all human ships from their spaceports. They're saying we're compromised by predator influence and pose a security risk. 3 other trade networks are considering similar bans." "What about our partners?" Jamin asked. "The species we've been working with for decades?" Young Su's expression was grim. "That's the worst part. They're not opposing the sanctions because they're afraid of being seen as predator sympathizers. Ambassador Kethtar from the Peaceful Coalition actually suggested that maybe humans need intervention to free us from Velnari mental manipulation." Jamin felt his heart sink. The Peaceful Coalition had been humanity's strongest allies for over 50 years. If they were turning against the human Velnari partnership, the situation was even worse than he'd thought. "There's more," Young Su continued. "Dalrex is calling for a special emergency session of the Galactic Council. He wants a formal vote to classify the Velnari as a dangerous species and prohibit any form of contact with them. If that passes, it would destroy everything we've built," Jamin finished. "All the medical breakthroughs, the exploration discoveries, the technological advances. It would all be labeled illegal and shut down." His door chimed, and Hyejin entered, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled, and she carried a tablet overflowing with diplomatic messages and legal documents. "Please tell me you have good news," she said, settling into a chair with the heavy movements of someone carrying the weight of the galaxy. "I wish I did," Jamin replied, filling her in on the latest developments. "Dalrex is really good at this propaganda thing. He's taking every piece of evidence about Velnari capabilities and spinning it to look threatening. Their biotechnology becomes biological warfare potential. Their empathic abilities become mind control techniques. Even their art gets described as hypnotic manipulation tools." Hyejin rubbed her temples. "And people are believing it?" "Fear is easier to sell than understanding," Young Su said from the screen. "Dalrex isn't asking species to learn something new or challenge their prejudices. He's just confirming what they already believed, that predators are dangerous and Humans are too trusting for our own good. What about our success stories, Hijin asked. The lives we've saved, the discoveries we've made. He's got answers for those too, Jamin said bitterly. The medical advances are clearly designed to make other species dependent on predator technology. The exploration successes are obviously planned to give humans and Velnari control over new resources. Every positive thing we've accomplished gets twisted into evidence of some sinister long-term plot. Hai-Jin was quiet for a long moment, staring at her tablet. When is the emergency council session? 3 days, Young-Soo replied. And Hai-Jin, they're not planning to let the Velnari attend. Dalrex convinced the council that having them present would be intimidating and potentially dangerous to other delegates. So we have to defend our partnership without our partners, Hijin said with bitter humor. Perfect. There's one more thing, Jamin said reluctantly. I've been getting informal messages from human colonies. Some of them are starting to question the partnership too. The economic pressure from the trade sanctions is real and people are scared. There's talk of reconsidering our alien relationships to get back in the galaxy's good graces. Hijin stood up abruptly, her exhaustion replaced by the fierce determination that had started this whole partnership. No, absolutely not. We're not abandoning the Velnari because other species are too frightened to see past their own prejudices. But if the Council votes against us, then we'll face the consequences together, Hijin said firmly. But I'm not giving up without a fight. If this emergency session is our last chance to make the case for cooperation over fear, then we'd better make it count. She headed for the door, then paused. Start preparing everything we have. Every success story, every life saved, every discovery made. If the galaxy wants to judge our partnership, they're going to hear the whole truth first. As she left, Jamin wondered if the truth would be enough to overcome the fear that Dalrex was spreading so effectively. In 3 days, they'd find out if the galaxy was ready to choose hope over hatred. The Grand Council chamber had never felt so hostile. Young-Soo stood at the speaker's podium, looking out at thousands of delegates from across the galaxy, and felt the weight of their collective fear pressing down on him like a physical force. The air itself seemed thick with tension, and he could see empty seats where species had refused to attend any session that might include Velnari presence. Behind him, Silvera waited in the designated area, her 8-foot form coiled with dignified patience despite the obvious hostility radiating from nearly every other delegate in the chamber. Her bioluminescent patterns were muted, almost grey, reflecting the somber mood of what might be their final opportunity to speak. Ambassador Dalrex had just finished his presentation, a masterful piece of fear-mongering that painted the human-Velnari partnership as a galactic threat. His crystal-like form gleamed under the chamber lights as he returned to his seat, clearly confident that he'd already won. The evidence is clear, Dalrex had concluded. These predators have somehow influenced human judgment, creating an unnatural alliance that threatens the safety of every peaceful species in the galaxy. We must act now, before this contamination spreads further. Now it was Young-Soo's turn, and he could feel the hostile attention of thousands of beings focused on him. He took a deep breath and began. "Honorable delegates," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "I stand before you today not to defend predators, but to challenge cowards." A shocked murmur rippled through the assembly. This wasn't the diplomatic language they'd expected. "Yes, I said cowards," Young-Soo continued, his confidence growing, "because what I see in this chamber isn't wisdom or caution. It's fear so deep that it blinds you to opportunity, prejudice so strong that it makes you reject friendship itself." Several delegates started shouting objections, but Young-Soo pressed on. "Ambassador Dalrex showed you images of Velnari strength and called it threatening. Let me show you what he didn't want you to see." The holographic displays around the chamber lit up with new images. The medical facility, where Jin Woo and Thylara had developed their life-saving treatments, showing hundreds of patients from dozens of species being healed by human Velnari. "Technology. This is Research Station Harmony," Young-Soo said as the images shifted, "where human curiosity and Velnari wisdom work together every day to solve problems that neither species could handle alone. The medicine created here has saved over 200,000 lives in the past year. Lives from your species. your families, your colonies. He gestured toward Silvera. You see an 8-foot predator. I see Dr. Silvera, who worked 18-hour days for 3 months to develop a treatment for Rigelian bone plague. She didn't do it because she was programmed to, or because she was manipulating anyone. She did it because children were dying, and she couldn't bear to let that continue. The chamber was quieter now, though the hostility hadn't entirely faded. Young Su could see some delegates actually looking at the medical data, and he pressed his advantage. You want to know what's really threatening about the Velnari? He asked. They make us better. They challenge us to be more than we are. And some of you can't stand that. Now He-Jin stepped forward to join him at the podium. She looked tired but determined, carrying herself with the quiet confidence that had first led her to approach Silvera months ago. My colleague is right, she said, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the chamber. The real threat here isn't the Velnari. It's the fear that keeps us from reaching our potential. She activated her own holographic display, showing the exploration missions led by Captain So Young. These are the 3 star systems we've discovered through joint human-Velnari exploration. Systems that contain resources worth billions, planets suitable for colonization, phenomena that are revolutionizing our understanding of physics. We found them because Velnari's spatial intuition guided us to places our instruments would never have detected. The display shifted to show engineering projects, art collaborations, philosophical exchanges. Every partnership we've formed with the Velnari has made both our species stronger, wiser, more capable. And instead of celebrating that success, you want to destroy it because it makes you uncomfortable. Ambassador Kethtar from the Peaceful Coalition stood up. Ambassador He-Jin, surely you must acknowledge the risk. These beings are natural predators. How can you be certain they're not manipulating human emotions? He-Jin smiled sadly. The same way I'm certain that you're not manipulating me right now, Ambassador, because I choose to believe in the possibility of genuine friendship rather than assuming the worst about everyone I meet. She turned to address the entire chamber. Humans have a reputation in this galaxy for being curious, sometimes recklessly so. We approach black holes to study them, dive into gas giants to explore them, make contact with unknown species just to see what happens. You've called us crazy for it, but you've also benefited from our discoveries. That curiosity is our greatest strength, she continued, her voice growing stronger. We don't look at the unknown and automatically assume it's dangerous. We look at it and wonder what we might learn, what we might discover, what friendships we might make. Young Su stepped forward again. How many opportunities has this galaxy missed because of fear? How many potential allies have been rejected because they looked different or seemed dangerous? How many problems could have been solved? How many discoveries could have been made if we'd chosen curiosity over terror? The chamber was completely silent now. Even Dalrek seemed to be listening rather than preparing his rebuttal. The Velnari aren't asking you to trust them, He-Jin said quietly. They're asking for the chance to earn that trust. Just like every friendship that's ever existed, it starts with someone willing to say hello instead of running away. She gestured towards Silvera, who had remained silent throughout the speeches. In a few minutes, you're going to vote on whether to classify an entire species as dangerous based purely on their appearance and capabilities. Before you do that, I'm going to ask Ambassador Silvera to do something that no Velnari has done in this chamber before. Silvera rose gracefully and approached the podium. For the first time in months of council sessions, she was going to speak directly to the assembled galaxy. I'm going to ask her to tell you who the Velnari really are. Silvera stood at the center of the Grand Council chamber, her 8-foot form perfectly still as thousands of eyes focused on her. The silence was so complete that Mi-Young, recording from the press gallery, could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. As the official documentarian for the human delegation, she'd witnessed dozens of council sessions, but nothing had ever felt as momentous as this single moment. Honorable delegates of the Galactic Council, Silvera began, her melodic voice carrying easily through the vast space without any amplification. You have heard much about what we are, but you have never seen who we are. She moved to an open area in front of the speaker's podium, her serpentine form flowing with liquid grace. So among my people, When we meet strangers for the first time, we perform the Silthena Velnara, the ceremony of true welcome. It is our way of showing not just our intentions, but our very souls. Mi-young adjusted her recording equipment, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Around the chamber, delegates leaned forward despite themselves, their fear temporarily overcome by curiosity. Silvera began to move, and what happened next took Mi-young's breath away. The Velnari's four arms began creating patterns in the air, movements so fluid and precise they seemed to paint invisible pictures in space. Her bioluminescent scales brightened, starting with soft blues and silvers, then expanding into waves of color that rippled across her entire form in perfect harmony with her movements. But it wasn't just beautiful, it was meaningful. Mi-young found herself understanding without words what Silvera was expressing. The patterns spoke of ancient hunters becoming gardeners of beauty, of strength choosing gentleness, of loneliness transformed into hope through unexpected friendship. Silvera's movements grew more complex. The light she generated began to form shapes in the air around her, geometric patterns that shifted into natural forms, mathematical equations that blossomed into artistic expressions. She was literally painting with light, creating a three-dimensional masterpiece that told the story of her people's evolution from predators to philosophers. The chamber was absolutely spellbound. Mi-young saw Ambassador Dalrex, who had spent weeks demonizing the Velnari, staring with his crystalline mouth hanging open. Even the warrior delegates from the Draxan clans had stopped scowling and were watching with something approaching awe. Then something unexpected happened. A soft harmonic tone began to resonate through the chamber, and Mi-young realized it was coming from the crystalline Kethtar delegation. The silicon-based beings were naturally resonant, and they were unconsciously harmonizing with the subtle frequencies Silvera's movements were creating. The effect was magical. The visual beauty of Silvera's ceremony combined with the Kethtar's crystalline music to create something that neither species could have achieved alone. Other delegates began to notice the harmony, and slowly, carefully, a few more species began to add their own voices. The flower-like botanicals released clouds of sweet-scented pollen that caught and reflected Silvera's lights. The wind dancers from the gas giant collective created gentle air currents that carried the music throughout the chamber. Even some of the more reserved species began to sway slightly in time with the rhythm. Mi-young was documenting frantically, knowing she was witnessing history. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was the first truly galactic art form, created spontaneously by species working together instead of running from each other. As Silvera's performance reached its climax, her bioluminescent patterns blazed with such beauty that several delegates actually gasped aloud. The story she was telling through movement and light culminated in an image that everyone could understand. Different species, represented by different colors and patterns, coming together to create something more beautiful than any could achieve, alone. When the ceremony ended, the silence that followed was different from the hostile quiet that had greeted her speech. This was the silence of awe, of minds being changed, of prejudices crumbling in the face of undeniable beauty. Ambassador Kethtar from the Peaceful Coalition was the first to move. The elderly diplomat slowly made his way down from his delegation's seating area, approaching Silvera with careful, respectful steps. When he reached her, he performed his own species' gesture of greeting, a gentle touching of foreheads that indicated trust and respect. "Ambassador Silvera," he said quietly, though his words carried in the silent chamber, "I apologize for my fear. I have been a fool." That seemed to break whatever spell had held the other delegates frozen. One by one, representatives began to leave their seats and approach the center of the chamber. Not all of them. Some species were still too frightened, or too proud, but enough to make a difference. General Thaxera from the Draxan warrior clans stepped forward, her massive armored form making the floor shake slightly. "Velnari," she said in her people's traditional battle voice, "we acknowledge honor in strength restrained. We have misjudged warriors who chose a harder path than conquest." The crystalline beings continued their harmonic resonance, creating a backdrop of music for what was becoming an impromptu celebration of interspecies friendship. Ambassador Dalrex remained in his seat, clearly struggling with everything he'd just witnessed, but Mi Young noticed that several members of his own delegation had joined the growing crowd around Silvera. Young Su found his way to Mi Young's position in the press gallery, his face bright with joy and disbelief. "Are you getting all this?" he asked. "Every second," Mi Young replied, checking her equipment one more time. "This is going to change everything, isn't it?" "It already has," Young Su said, watching as more species continued to approach Silvera, each offering their own forms of greeting and apology. "Look at them. An hour ago, half these delegates wouldn't stay in the same room with a Velnari. Now they're making friends." Hye Jin appeared beside them, tears streaming down her face. "She did it," she whispered. "Silvera actually did it. She showed them that beauty is stronger than fear." Mi Young watched through her camera as the ceremony continued to evolve, with different species sharing their own cultural expressions in response to Silvera's welcome. It was messy and unplanned and absolutely beautiful, exactly the kind of chaotic cooperation that happened when people chose curiosity over fear. "You know what the most amazing part is?" Mi Young said, still recording as a group of young delegates from 6 different species began attempting to recreate some of Silvera's light patterns. It all started because one human decided to say hello instead of running away. She looked at Hye Jin, who was now surrounded by delegates asking questions about human Velnari cooperation programs. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is the simplest thing. Sometimes courage is just saying hello to someone everyone else is afraid to meet." As the celebration continued around them, Mi Young realized she wasn't just documenting a political victory. She was recording the birth of a new kind of galaxy, one where differences were celebrated instead of feared, where friendship was possible between any species willing to take the first step. The Velnari had waited patiently for someone to see. Past their appearance to their hearts, humanity had been brave enough to look, and now finally the rest of the galaxy was beginning to understand what they'd been missing all along.